Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Offshore Energy Digital and Data Strategy Task Force launch event. I'm Nick Granger, Director of Corporate for the OGA, and will be chairing the task force. Can I start by letting you know that the session is being recorded today? The slides and the recording will be made available soon after the session completes. As we continue for the session this afternoon, if you've got any questions, please add those to the chat. We will try to address the majority of the questions during the panel session, but if we can't get around to all of them, the questions will be captured and we'll respond to those afterwards. Also, at the end of the session, you will see an email address for the task force where you can sign up to join the mailing list and find out about future industry and event updates. This email address can also be used to contact if you want to discuss some of the key topics and arrange engagement with the task force going forward. So in this afternoon's webinar, you'll hear from a number of the project partners. We'll give you an overview of the task force in terms of the aims and the timelines for the project. And then towards the end, we have a group of panelists who will be available to answer some of your questions and give you their thoughts in terms of the strategy. So many thanks to our partners and funders for this event. We will try to talk a bit about some of those partners and their involvement as we go forward. So I'd just like to start with some of my thoughts about why the Digital and Data Task Force is required. The UK net zero obligation creates significant obligations on offshore energy, accelerating the deployment of alternative energies whilst continuing to seek reduction in all existing manufacturing, construction, operational and decommissioning emissions. The transition to net zero creates significant challenges for the offshore energy sector. To reduce direct emissions, operations will need to be diversified into alternative energy types, such as hydrogen and offshore wind, as well as accelerating the deployment of carbon capture and storage technologies. Huge strides have been taken with the North Sea Transition Deal, committing 16 billion of new investment in the energy transition, including electrification, CCS and hydrogen, the first of its kind for a G7 country. The pandemic has highlighted the value of digital and data to society and decision makers. We've all seen it used in government briefings over the last few years. The recently released National Data Strategy will drive the UK in creating a world-leading data economy, building on the ambitions of the government digital strategy to add 240 billion of value to the UK economy from digital and data in recent years. Data and the digital solutions that use it are being recognised as a national asset. This isn't anything new in our industry. We're lucky that data has always been viewed as a critical asset for the offshore energy industry. So collectively, we're well placed to use this to help drive the energy transition. We know that data will unlock the potential for CCS and hydrogen and enable the best placement of wind farms, whilst ensuring a more environmentally sustainable oil and gas industry as we transition to cleaner forms of energy. From a strategic point of view, digital solutions powered by quality data enable us all to understand the wider energy system and identify innovative approaches. For the offshore energy industry, a coherent and industry-supported offshore energy digital and data strategy would be critical, setting the foundations for the creation of a modern, digitalised, integrated offshore energy system. The UK CS is as busy and complex as ever, with breadth of activity at an all-time high. At the OGA, we recently collaborated with the Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland to use our joint digital expertise and data to develop an app showing the hundreds of energy leases in the UK CS. By collaborating in this way, we add more value by having a shared understanding and make best use of our skills. Spatial planning, for example, is becoming increasingly vital to establish what is best for the UK offshore energy sector. But it needs data from across the energy sectors, as well as digital tools and expertise to turn it into meaningful actions. We collectively need to ensure we have the data, digital skills and culture to make the best decisions about our natural resources and energy needs. Today, we'll hear from a range of speakers about what this task force means to them and how it will deliver this. And I'll now hand over to Steve Ashley from the Net Zero Technology Centre, who's going to talk about that from his point of view.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. What does it mean to me? Well, we've heard from Nick that the UK net zero target puts significant obligations on the offshore energy industry, and that will require significant energy diversification, but also integration. Indeed, energy integration across the UKCS has the potential to make a significant impact towards the country's overall net zero target, possibly delivering up to 60% of the abatement required by 2050. So that's, fantastic opportunity. However, and what we're going to see to deliver that over the next few decades, there'll be a massive increase in projects to build out the major infrastructure that will be needed. Enabling this to happen efficiently, however, and in an integrated fashion, will require whole system thinking and for collaboration to happen across the sector. Contributions will be needed from every part of the offshore energy industry, which, although it already has a significant track record of delivery and innovation, has often struggled with data quality, visibility, and data sharing in the past. Nick has already talked about some of the initiatives that are already happening that are data-driven. And to enable these and future integration, we're going to need one data-driven digitalized energy system. And to deliver that will mean working together, learning from each other, and indeed learning from other sectors. So why an offshore energy digital and data strategy? The data is important as the foundation for a digitalized energy system is recognized across the sector and across many aligned sectors. The Energy Data Taskforce, led by the Energy Systems Catapult and chaired by Laura Sands, identified that in the downstream energy sector, a digitalized energy system was being hindered by poor quality and inaccurate or missing data, while valuable data is often restricted or hard to find. It is clear from other industry surveys, such as the Oil and Gas UK Data and Digital Maturity Survey and others such surveys in the renewable sector, that there's a very similar challenge in the offshore energy sector. We're not starting from scratch, however. Most industry sectors and organizations have programs in place to improve data quality and provide better access to data. However, given the size of the challenge, it is fundamentally important that we work together to ensure that we have a coordinated approach that we can all align with. So today we are launching this task force to develop an offshore energy digital and data strategy that will identify first the current status of programs, data usage and sharing across the offshore sector as it stands today, then leverage the experience and knowledge gained from the ongoing cross-sector initiatives, some of which Nick talked about, the UK data strategy, but in particular learning from the Energy Data Task Force and the Energy Digitalization Task Force that you're going to hear Laura Sands talk a little bit about in a minute. It will consider the key themes from the Energy Data Task Force: data visibility, infrastructure and asset visibility, operational optimization, market opportunities and regulatory considerations. These are all things that industry has struggled with and worked on as individual organizations across the industry, but we really need to develop how we can apply these to the offshore energy sector. It will also identify if there are other data and digital themes that we need to consider in the particular concept, the particular aspect of offshore digital energy or offshore energy. We'll explore potential opportunities and the way forward, and most importantly, build a shared consensus together with all stakeholders across the industry to provide some clear recommendations with a prioritized delivery roadmap for the future. And why do I consider this important? I think the size of the challenge ahead is only surpassed by the opportunity that will come with success. The rewards for the industry of reaching or exceeding net zero by 2050 will extend to encompass UK manufacturing, long-term job creation, skill upskilling and skills transition, energy security, investment, innovation. But all this needs to start with a shared understanding of how we're going to create an offshore energy system that is data-driven, optimized, stable and secure. One where data is available, of high quality, interoperable and as open as possible. And as such, we are launching the Offshore Energy Digital and Data Strategy, a cross-sector initiative that will be needed to enable digital technologies and data to support the offshore energy transition and reach our net zero goal. Thank you. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Steve. So now we're going to hear a short video from Laura Sands, who is chairing the Energy Digitalisation Taskforce.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's been a great pleasure to be here today and to welcome the launch of the Offshore Data Strategy Taskforce. I'm Laura Sands and I chair the Energy Digitalisation Taskforce with the great team at the Energy Systems Catapult, who are going to be very much instrumental in your task force. So very, very pleased to be here together. Now, I think that the whole issue about the offshore environment and how we start to look at that, the data strategy, is going to be absolutely crucial to what we would call the whole system transition. The Energy Digitalisation Task Force will in many ways be looking right across that, the whole system, but ensuring that the offshore elements are absolutely accommodated for and really incorporated into an overall strategy. I think this is a very, very exciting initiative. So congratulations. I think there is a huge benefit of both our task forces running concurrently, and I know we'll be working very closely together. This is particularly important when it comes to carbon monitoring and how we ensure that in many ways we have the visibility for security and resilience of the system. I know that both task forces will also be focusing a lot on skills and culture, which is absolutely crucial to our sector to ensure that we end up with as much focus on digitalisation as we do on other elements of the energy transition. But I do think working together, we'll get more bang for our buck as such with both projects conflating many of the recommendations. The Offshore Task Force will also hopefully benefit from some of the work done during the Energy Data Task Force, of course looking at the key principle of presumed open, which actually underpins many of the other initiatives that are coming through that I know that the offshore sector will be interested in and embracing. So I wish you all a very, very successful task force. I know that you'll be in absolutely excellent hands with the Energy Systems Catapult and look forward to working very closely together as we bring these two task forces together to ensure that we have a joined up whole system transition. Thank you so much.
So many thanks to Laura for that message. And as she said, the two task force will be working closely together throughout these projects. So we're now going to hear from Ben at Energy Systems Catapult, who's going to give us an overview of the project itself.
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Leland. I'm a senior consultant here at Energy Systems Catapult. I'm the project lead for this task force, and I also work on the other task force that Laura mentioned, the Digitalisation Task Force. So hopefully that sort of connection between the two will allow us to sort of bridge the gap a little bit. I also have the sort of slightly unique perspective of having worked on both sides of the task force, having engaged with Richard Dobson and the data systems team a couple of years ago as part of the Energy Data Task Force, whilst working for a sort of smaller innovator at the time. So hopefully you can sort of bring some of that experience into the project as well. Very briefly, just for those that might not know about Energy Systems Catapult or what it is that we do precisely. So we're an independent non-profit, partly funded by the UK government through Innovate UK. And largely speaking, our activities focus around either innovator support, so working with smaller companies in the sector as they try and bring products and services to market. And that might be things through like business modeling or technical support, or things like consumer research and customer engagement. The other part then is around sort of facilitating these large cross-industry stakeholder engagement events, the aim of which is to kind of help inform and shape the strategy and policy across the energy sector as we move forwards. And obviously that's the kind of bucket that this task force project will fall into. What I wanted to do just to begin with was just highlight the sort of important principles and objectives that we think are really important for all of the work that we're going to undertake to be sort of based in and work towards in order to sort of achieve our ultimate game. On the principle side, so it's sort of crucial that we build on the existing work that's been referenced by the sort of previous speakers. So making sure that we take advantage of the work that's gone on onshore and offshore over the past few years, and where we can borrow learnings and recommendations from them. Maximizing the value of data is another principle that we adhere to throughout. So you'll be unsurprised to hear that, given that we're sort of looking at a data task force. This could be things like making sure that data is accessible by the right parties and can be facilitated through things like changes to licensing and data sharing agreements and things like that. Ultimately, though, we're aiming for consistent, clean and complete data across the sector, and that can be done through the use of standards and interoperability, and there are some key overlaps with the digitalization task force there as well. Finally, we want to make sure that we're aligning with other governance and energy data initiatives, partly just in order of to make sure that we're efficient and we're not redoing work that's already been done, but also it's absolutely crucial in terms of creating a coherent whole system energy transition plan. In terms of objectives then, so obviously we're moving towards a shared digital and data strategy. That's the ultimate aim of the task force. And that needs to be across the sector, and ultimately will be helping join up the many different programs of work that are already underway in the different digital strategies of the different organizations, some of which are involved in the steering group of this project. And we need to make sure it's aligned with the wider energy system. So as Laura mentioned, having a whole system view and making sure that the onshore and offshore systems are more tightly integrated is going to be crucial for system stability going forwards. Another objective is that we want to be able to make sure that we're enabling innovation and addressing specific digitalization gaps. Innovation can come from the smaller innovators, which I've already mentioned that the Catapult work with on a frequent basis, but can also come from more established companies where they can sort of exercise their extensive experience over the years and bring new products and services to market and fill particular solutions. And then finally, one of the key points is around making sure that we're identifying the barriers to cross-sector data sharing. And that's both within organizations in some cases, but within the sector and between the onshore and offshore sectors as well. The Energy Data Task Force has been mentioned a couple of times so far, and there's a few things I just wanted to highlight briefly, mainly to give context to the task force that we will be undertaking here. The reason is that this was a large piece of work undertaken a couple of years ago now, and there have been several projects and initiatives coming off the back of it that we're going to hopefully build on and utilize as part of the Offshore Task Force. So the Energy Data Task Force was commissioned by Bayes, Ofgem and Innovate UK in 2018 to assess the energy data landscape basically and identify where there are problems and barriers to data sharing. There was an extensive 8-month period of stakeholder engagement, and the result of which was a report which sort of grouped together 5 high-level recommendations, which you can see labelled on the screen. The report's obviously still available on our website, and I would encourage anyone who's sort of interested in this task force and engaging with us to go and understand how that project ran and the outcomes of which, because it's very good context for what we're hoping to evolve on and utilise going forward here. 3 of the recommendations, I think, we believe are fundamental data requirements for a digitalized system. So with Presumed Open, this is all around breaking down the data silos that might exist within an industry, essentially allowing data owners to publish data safely, making sure they're accounting for legal, regulatory and data privacy issues. And we've done this by implementing what we call the open data triage process, which is something that I will reference again in a minute. In terms of visibility, data catalogs are crucial in cross-sector data discovery and visibility between different organizations. This can be done through either just a straight up data catalog or through implementing things like metadata standards to aid better data visibility between partners. And then in terms of infrastructure and asset visibility, so this is about digitizing or making legacy data more accessible. It might already exist, or it might need data to be captured regarding various assets. This could ultimately end up resulting in projects such as like system maps, digital system maps, which are useful for companies new and old in the sector. It could also be extended down to better asset monitoring, so getting better operational data being made available to the right companies. That was the kind of outcomes of the project itself. I just wanted to very briefly highlight a few of the different projects which have resulted from the publication of the report a couple of years ago. Broadly speaking, these are all kind of categorized into either sort of data publishing projects, tools or metadata tools, or even policy and regulatory changes that have been implemented off the back of the report. There are many examples here, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but there were a couple that I wanted to pick out. So the Presumed Open Data Project, which is a WPD-led initiative, NIA funded, which was looking to build upon the open data triage process and the Presumed Open recommendation, which came out of the EDTF report. This ultimately has resulted in the release of the Data Release Playbook, which is a comprehensive series of tools and processes to help data owners manage and improve their data sharing standards going forward. Icebreaker One have picked up a couple of different projects which have been directly related to the EDTF. One around open energy, which is building a modern digital data governance system to enable people to confirm identity and manage authentication and authorization of data access. The other one is the Energy Data Visibility Project, which has been procured by BEIS, a project that's been run by BEIS in order to start the groundwork for building a cross-sector data visibility platform. And this also can utilize things like the Open Data Search, which has been implemented as part of the Open Energy project. And then finally, the Energy Data Best Practice. So this is a piece of work that we worked on alongside BEIS, Ofgem and Innovate UK. And it's all around developing a set of principles that helps organizations to understand what supporting information they should be producing with data that they publish, how they should be running their data systems and what a good practice, and also how they should be approaching accessibility and visibility of that data. The reason this is particularly important to highlight is that this is something that's actually been integrated into policy changes and included in the RIIO-2 consultation recently. So hopefully all of these things that we're sort of aware of and in some cases have been involved in off the back of the last task force, we can utilise and bring forward into the Offshore Data Strategy Task Force going forward. So a little bit about the project itself, some timelines, and then in a second I'll go into how you can get involved. The methodology, so really what I really want to emphasize is the key to the success of all of this is comprehensive stakeholder engagement throughout. So we're currently in the middle of a discovery process, speaking to some of our project partners, which will be concluding in the next few weeks. And then from this point on, really, there'll be continuous engagement with stakeholders who wish to contribute to the project. And we'll also be running some industry events, which I'll describe shortly. The delivery phase will consist of 3 sprints, roughly a month long each. Generally speaking, during these, what we're looking to do is formulate, test, and evolve the recommendations each time. The idea being if we can do that with industry and with input from as many people as possible, then by the time we come to publish the report and the recommendations, none of it should be a surprise. Hopefully we move all of the industry along together with recommendations that have been co-designed from all participants throughout. And then dissemination phase, so we'll be looking to publish the final report and the recommendations at the back end of January next year. And yeah, hopefully there will be some additional webinars and dissemination activity off the back of that as well. So hopefully everyone will get good visibility of the outcome of the project. I'd just like to emphasize here that I think one of the reasons that the Energy Data Task Force has been so successful is making sure that ownership has been assigned to the recommendations. So if you go through the report, you'll see the high level ones which we've mentioned, but they're broken down into specific actionable recommendations. And each one is assigned an owner or a couple of owners in some cases who are responsible for implementing or actioning that recommendation. And this has really enabled a lot of projects off the back of the last task force to be brought into existence and has proved some degree of success. And we'll be looking to replicate that here as well. So we'll have a similar level of kind of detail and ownership assigned in that final report. Finally then, so what next? Hopefully this has sparked some ideas and opinions. What I wanted to do was just mention some of the areas and ideas of things that we would love to get people's input on. There's the Taskforce email address at the bottom there. There's also a mailing list that you can sign up to, which will send out periodic updates, in particular around the upcoming industry events. So in terms of data and the sort of like technical side of the projects, we've already spoken a bit about availability and visibility. Data quality obviously comes under that similar umbrella as well. So it'd be excellent to hear how people's experience has gone in that area. In terms of standards and interoperability, are there areas where standards should be adopted that already exist, or do we need to develop new standards in order to improve the data quality and digitalization in some areas? For use cases, are there use cases that your organization is thinking about doing but can't, or thinks that there are opportunities to do should there be several other things put in place? Understanding sort of business opportunities and future opportunities is key as part of this task force. Future data requirements can cover anything, pretty broad, like the sort of use cases description as well. But in particular, I wanted to highlight the carbon tracking that Laura mentioned as well. So it's one of the big focuses of the digitalization task force, is putting in place the reporting requirements and the hardware requirements to make sure that we can track carbon all the way along its lifeline, essentially. It would also be good to hear what works well. So rather than just pointing out problems, are there areas that we can look at where there are good examples that we could potentially apply to other areas of the sector, maybe even from outside of energy, that we can bring in and look to for inspiration? In terms of governance, things like, where are there barriers to access data? What are those barriers, and what do you think could be done in order to remove those? Things like data reporting obligations, are they sufficient? Could they be relaxed in some areas? Do we need new ones in other areas in order to realize some of these opportunities? And then there'll be a large non-technical element as well. So industry processes that may exist on either side in terms of oil and gas or within the renewables, can they be improved? Can we look at those through a digitalization lens and understand where improvements can be made? In terms of skills and culture, where can we take existing skills from the industry and look to reapply them or shift them across or learn from other sectors? And how do we embed a sort of data savvy and digital savvy culture amongst the offshore sector and help it to grow? Finally, then, any sort of ideas or recommendations around where we think there could be collaboration between parties, where there might be overlap between objectives, and where we can reutilize existing assets, either physical or digital assets between different parties. So please do get in touch via the email address below, and we'll be using that to manage engagement throughout the project. Finally, then, I mentioned that there would be a couple of industry events. So currently, we're obviously at the launch event today. Ideally, we're going to be running 2 before Christmas so that we can feed them into the final report. There'll be details of one going out in the next sort of few days to a week, which is likely to be at the end of October. And then depending on how the sort of outcomes for that go and the development of recommendations, there'll probably be one around the end of November, beginning of December. So please do use the mailing list in order to be notified of those first and foremost that way. That's everything I sort of wanted to run through today. Really look forward to hopefully speaking to a lot of you, and do please get in touch. It's fantastic to have so many different views as part of this project. So thank you very much. Which leaves me to introduce Simon, who's now going to be hosting our panel discussion. So I will hand over to Simon to introduce our panelists and take away with some questions.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm Simon Pearson. I'm the head of digital and data at the Energy Systems Catapult. So I've been involved in all of the projects that we've referenced before, the original task force and the preceding work, and the current digitalization task force itself. And I've been working with the sponsors and stakeholders on the steering board for the offshore project for the last few months to get to the point where we are today to launch this. So I'm going to share a short panel session. I'm very lucky to have been joined by a number of key players in the sector who I will ask to introduce themselves in a few minutes. We'll run through a few particular topics that I think might be relevant here. If you do have any questions, then please raise them in the chat, and if we have time at the end, we will seek to add those in. So I'd like to introduce the panel members themselves. If they could put their video and microphones on, that would be great. Excellent. can't see Ed. Have we got Ed Evans? Not yet. Okay. Hopefully Ed will join us very shortly. So if I could ask each of you just to give a very short, there's Ed, excellent. A very short introduction in terms of who you are and where your what your representation is and why the task force is interesting and why you're involved in that. So perhaps if I could start in reverse order, if I could start with Ed, perhaps you could kick us off, please.
Yeah, it's my fault for being late to the party, isn't it? So thanks very much, Simon. My name's Ed Evans. I work with the Open Data Institute. I started here earlier this year, having spent around 20 years or so primarily in oil and gas, looking at data management, data governance. I've kind of come into the whole data sharing and open data aspect, and I liked it so much I joined the organization here. So I'm hoping to use that knowledge to help where I can within this process. So I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Perhaps I could invite Chelsea to go next.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Chelsea Bradbury, I'm the Marine Evidence Manager at the Crown Estate. So why am I interested in this? I guess my role is all about data and evidence and how we can use it to facilitate the sustainable development of the seabed. So day to day, we're looking at promoting data sharing and opportunities to ultimately encourage evidence-based decision making. So this task force is absolutely great for that, for bringing lots of the different sectors together within the offshore energy space. So yeah, really looking forward to being involved. And
Dan Sumner.
Thanks, Simon. I'm Dan Sumner from the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which for others on the call is a sister catapult of the energy systems. We are a delivery partner on the project. We're really looking forward to it. Our role is primarily stakeholder engagement and really looking forward to getting involved. Our main purpose is UK innovation and pushing UK companies through the TRL levels. Thanks.
Excellent. And John.
Hi, thanks, Simon. So John Seaborn, I'm Chief Digital Officer at the Oil and Gas Authority. So we've been involved in this kind of project and program for the last kind of 6 months or so and kept a keen view on what was happening with Bays and Ofgem. So we're very excited to get involved and build on the good work that's already happened, particularly in our sector with open data and data sharing, and more recently, making vast amounts of data available, not just for the oil and gas sector, but how that can be reused across carbon capture and storage in particular in the future. So very excited to be involved.
That's great. Thanks, John. Since John, you were speaking anyway, I might perhaps start with the first question with yourself. Which is really about how you see the work that we're going to do in this task force and digital and data strategies generally playing into the North Sea transition deal, for example.
Yeah, sure. So for those that aren't aware, the North Sea kind of transition deal commits industry to a series of short, medium and long-term targets, particularly to reduce emissions. So we're talking a 10% drop by 2025, 25% drop by 2027. 50% by 2030, and then ultimately to be at net zero by 2050. The deal is all about bringing fossil fuels to net zero, and it commits to over £16 billion worth of activity. Most of that around energy transition, including electrification, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen. And for me, you can't do any of those activities without a good, solid set of data, good data quality, digital and data tools, and particularly the skills and experience to not only understand that, but interpret it, and then use that to make some decisions and decide on some pretty major courses of action.
Okay. And John, what would you see as being some of the key areas that the task force, because as you say, it's a huge area. What might be some of the key areas that that the task force could focus on?
So for me, there's probably kind of 3 main areas that I've really thought about. So we've already heard, I think, not only Nick, but also Ben mentioned data quality. So for me, if the data quality isn't there, there's no point with anything else that comes afterwards. And actually just having visibility of that data and allowing people to see it and go after it, then that's really kind of fundamental for everything that we're doing. What that then kind of ties onto is, what does that data need to look like? What is the feedstock that we need to be able to bring digital and data tools on top of that? Do we need things to be machine readable for AI and machine learning? Do we need to modernize some of the legacy formats that we've had over the last 20 or 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years, if we're talking about some of the onshore data? And then what can we do to surface some of this information that's been buried and lost in sticky notes and bits of paper and, you know, old school PDF documents? We are literally talking about millions and millions of bits of information buried deep down. And then picking up on something Chelsea said in her introduction is around collaboration, not just collaboration within the kind of community we've got here, but collaboration across sectors. What can we learn from the other organisations, the other sectors? How can we encourage government departments to work better together? And that is a complicated landscape, and some of the mapping activity we've done, you're easily at 20, 30 organisations, and that's just from the government element. We then start bringing in the private sector and some of the other innovation groups. It's huge. And that really doesn't stop in the UK either. There's an element of cross-border, I think, that becomes more and more important. What can we do together to make the North Sea an attractive area to generate energy and help us on that kind of net zero journey? And finally, that kind of ties into the spatial planning as well. We found over the last few years how complex that environment is. So we worked with Crown Estates and Crown Estates Scotland to put together a lease map, which really kind of shows the sheer amount of activity that's currently occurring, not only on the surface, but on the seabed and also the subsurface. It's becoming quite a busy area. And I think there's kind of a responsibility on us all to work together to solve some of the biggest issues that our society faces in the next few years.
Brilliant, thanks, John. That probably provides a nice segue actually into, if I could pick on Chelsea next. So I know the Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland are obviously heavily involved in facilitating new infrastructures and collaboration for the offshore sector. So how do you see this task force aligning with the work that you've done? You mentioned a lot of the work you've already done in data sharing, for example. So picking up on some of those points.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't talk for Crown Estate Scotland, they'll be pleased to know, but I think talking from the Crown Estate's point of view, our goal offshore is to ensure that we play a central role in helping the UK to maximise the productivity of the seabed in support of the net zero transition. As we've heard and we all know, the seabed has an increasingly important role to play in that transition, not only in meeting clean energy needs, but as John was talking to earlier, there's also a responsibility to support jobs, clean growth and biodiversity. The UK is a global leader in offshore wind, and we know that demand for clean energy is only growing. The seabed is getting busier, as John just said, and alongside that, there's an absolute need to protect and foster the precious biodiversity and habitats that we have in our seas. So I think it's fair to say that the status quo to date has resulted in a flourishing sector that is delivering clean, reliable, low-cost power, but it won't get us to 2050. And we definitely acknowledge the fact that building new data and digital capabilities will be a vital part of helping to unlock that pathway and just the investment in general required to get us to 2050. So I think from the Crown Estate's point of view, we are committed to continuing to invest in data and evidence to really help to support future seabed leasing and to accelerate sustainable development. And I think picking up on a point that was made earlier by Nick and others, but to build on that a little bit more, is that we aren't starting from scratch as such. We do have some foundations to work from. The concept of data and evidence isn't new to the offshore energy sectors, as we all know. Since 2003, the Crown Estate have been inserting data clauses into our offshore leases and licenses to promote data sharing. And we work with our offshore customers, renewable customers in particular, to develop the functionality of the Marine Data Exchange, which is a system similar to the OGA's National Data Repository. It's a system developed by the Crown Estate back in 2013 to store, manage and to ultimately share survey data that's being collected by the Crown Estate's offshore customers. So I mean, the MD holds over 200 terabytes of survey data covering environmental data, physical data such as geotechnical, geophysical, resource data, so wind, wave, currents. So a huge amount of data that all has to meet the Medin data guideline standards. It has to have Medin discovery standard metadata. And over 60% of that data is publicly available for others to download free of charge. So I guess the point I want to make there and my bid there is to reassure everyone that data sharing isn't new to the offshore renewable sector, and through the MDE, the sector is familiar with marine data standards. So we do have some great foundations to build on and lessons that we can really take forward. And I think the last point, apologies, I could talk all day on this topic, but my last point really is that's all around the data and digital space. But I think for the Crown Estate, it's also important that we look at evidence specifically and how we turn that data into evidence that can really help to support decision making. Last year, as one example, we launched the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, OEC. And this just really highlights the importance of partnerships and collaborations. That's a programme that is really part of our long-term goal to help to support offshore wind. And it's in partnership with industry, stakeholders and government to really gather and share evidence to facilitate the growth of the offshore wind sector in a way that best protects and enhances the environment. So I promise I will be quiet now, but I guess in summary, there are lots of initiatives out there that are in place to help us with those foundations to build on. But to really push forward and to get to 2050, there does need to be a step change. And the Crown Estate are committed to investing in data and digital. So it's a great opportunity to be a part of this and to see, as I said at the start, how we can bring all of the different sectors together. I will be quiet now.
No, that was really good, really informative. Thank you, Chelsea. Appreciate that. Again, that probably sort of leads me perhaps into Dan Sumner from the Offshore Renewables Catapult to talk about some of the areas where the uptake of this stuff and the uptake of future technologies in the renewable space plays and is dependent on digital and data. I know that's an area that you're very active in.
Yeah, thanks. You've left me a really hard job to answer this after John and Chelsea have given really good answers. But earlier on, Ben talked about standards and interoperability. If I was to look back a step, that's really important for us because standards shared across sectors means a larger market for innovators, and it also means a clear route to market, which is often the hardest thing for people that we speak to. A good example for on the ground, the one that we worked with, currently got a project looking at carbon monitoring. Again, something that we've been talked about today, to do with vessels in and around O&M port side. If there was a shared data strategy around how you could organize, trend, analyze the AIS data from those ships, if those standards was in place, it would have made that project a lot easier and their route to market a lot easier. And again, as Chelsea said, it's not so much the data that we're interested in, it's the evidence and it's the insights that come off the back of it. But you can only optimize those insights if you have a strategy, and that's what I'm really hoping to contribute towards it in this project, creating that strategy to optimize any insights and evidence to really make a change, make a difference.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Dan. And Ed, when we were chatting the other day, a couple of weeks ago, in fact, you from your previous lives, I think, suggested that a lot of the oil companies, for example, have lots and lots of data that could be very useful when we're looking at opening up the markets and the transition to net zero. But there may be some challenges along that journey. What do you feel the opportunities might be there, and what some of the challenges that might be?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Simon. I think there are huge opportunities. The oil and gas companies obviously sit on a huge pile of data and have been sharing the data through compliance and the technical data through the CDA and now the NDR. So they have processes for doing that, but it's restricted, and quite rightly, the oil and gas companies see the data as being a commercial and technical advantage in the commercial world between each other, and that's the mindset that has been developed. And so the opportunity for us is to kind of work with those companies to show how, by widening the ecosystem of that data, by sharing it more widely, you can actually foster additional benefits for not just for the wider community we're talking about here, but actually for the data sharer themselves, which is that counterintuitive aspect. And that's what I've been learning working with the Open Data Institute. So you imagine that if we could to create a data trust of pooling additional data beyond what's already in the CDA or an NDR already, you know, maybe some of the interpretation and some of the models have been built, which is a real IP of those organizations. But if we could demonstrate somehow how that data trust would lead to additional innovation, would lead to cost savings for themselves, to generate more insights because of the breadth of data, then the prize is enormous. And other examples would be even just in a simple supply chain scenario, where by sharing data with the ecosystem within the supply chain, you can sort of outsource, if you like, the innovation. People can come back with ideas. So you know, it's I'm sure those things are occupying the oil and gas companies, and what we can do is provide the motivation and the platform for doing that. I think that there's a lot of value to be delivered. So I'd see it also as helping them build towards the ESG goals, to their own path towards net zero. And it's a good opportunity for the energy transition to get involved in wider aspects. But it's going to take us things like this initiative to help show that path, show what process is, and show how it can be done, protecting the data suppliers, but also showing where the value lies as well. So I think that's a real challenge.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful, Ed. So another a question not aimed at anybody specifically. I've been involved in several of these task forces over the last few years now, and I guess the common theme is they're all different, and they encounter different opportunities and different challenges. So in this case, I guess what would the panel think are some of the key challenges that we might face in this task force? Because one of the common themes of a task force is they're all relatively short periods of time. They're measured in single-digit months, which is not it's not as agile as doing software project management, but it's also not a long period of time to do a fairly substantial body of work. So what do you see some of the challenges we might encounter along the way? Open to the panel.
So I don't mind addressing that one as a starter. So for me, I think it's just the sheer breadth of different data types that I think we have offshore, comparing that with the work that's been done onshore, where there's a very clear kind of consumer focus. And that maybe then ties back into the kind of wider energy network. Offshore, I think it's a lot broader because we're talking about energy generation. We're talking about how that energy is then shared across the multiple different assets. We then get into the whole kind of leasing and evidence-based pieces of information we'll need to help people make decisions. Throw in some environmental data in there as well, which is obviously very important with where we can and can't do certain activities. And then, as kind of Chelsea mentioned, the seabed, but you also have the subsurface, which kind of falls more into kind of our domain. But then you have the surface as well. So then you start bringing in all these different agencies and organizations. So I think for me, the real challenge is going to be, how do you bring all of that together into a coherent offshore strategy? And actually, even, is it possible, or are we looking at multiple different strategies to help us make sense of what is a very complicated landscape, not only in terms of who's involved, but what's involved within it.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
No, well, just add a little bit there. What would help me, I think, would be to choose a use case, because it is such a wide and broad field. If we were to focus on one or two key use cases, I think that would help start small and build from that. So it's maybe an obvious thing to say, but it's about focus, and it's about having some tangible things to go for.
Okay. One of the things. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Simon.
No, go ahead, Chelsea, please.
I was just going to build upon what was said. Really, I completely agree with what John and Ed were saying before, and I think you've got the offshore energy space and some very different sectors at very different phases of their their history, really, and lots of different. You look at the oil and gas sector, ridiculous amounts of historic data, as John's already said, in lots of different formats. And how do we get value from data that we can't go and recollect? That the standard that data was collected in at the time is the standard that we have to work on. So I think marrying up the different ages and quality of the data to get some valuable outputs from it will be difficult. I think the one thing that I was going to say, and you alluded to it, was time. There's not lots of time for this task force, and I think building on Ed's point earlier, I think we really need to bring the industry along with us. They will be paramount to the success of this, regardless of what we as panelists say today. They will be the deciders of whether this can really be successful or not. And I think the onus is on us to really understand what are the barriers to them, why aren't they willing to share the data. With the offshore renewable sector, we inserted the data clause in 2003, and we've been working with the offshore wind sector since to really understand the sensitivities around the different types of data. And that's a constantly evolving space as the market gets more competitive, different types of data are more sensitive. So I think it's having the time to really sit down with the industry and really understand what the barriers are to sharing data, and having the time to do that, and then come up with a plan that they're fully on board with in the time might be tricky.
And Dan, I think you're the only one who's not commented on that. Is there anything you'd like to add to that in the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, so time, scope, and then difficulty of getting information is a good summary. And in terms of it is coming in from the chat as well, getting the right data from the right people will be really crucial here, and getting people on board. It's something already Catapult have a little bit of experience in. We have a program called Sparta, but it's about making sure that data is anonymized where it needs to be, it's presumed open where it needs to be, and everything is communicated freely and openly. It's just balancing act that we've got to get right.
Yeah, agreed. We've had a few questions in on the chat, but I'm conscious that we're pretty much out of time. I guess there's one comment I'll make on that, which is around, as you said, what's the hard bit about this: time, cost, and scope of work. It's quite a good summary, really. I guess the thing we learned from the previous task forces is that, in a way, a task force is not always the right name. I almost think they should be more of a catalyst, because that's really what they are. It's about stimulating action, and Ben sort of highlighted it from the original task force work. The task force itself did a good body of work, but what it actually did was create a bow wave of more work beyond that. There's been a whole lot of things, including policy and regulation changes and such like. I appreciate the two sectors are not swappable, so what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. But I think we have to consider this as being a way to catalyse some of that future work, because it's not going to be solved as a strategy that we can just blueprint in 7 or 8 months' time, I think. I'm conscious of time, so I would like to thank everybody on the panel for your extremely comprehensive responses. Normally, I have a very long list of questions, just in case we don't get good quality answers. I've not needed those today at all, so that's been really good. So I'd like to thank you all for that, and then hand back to Nick for any closing comments, please.
Thanks, Simon. So to start off with, a big thank you to our speakers, Steve and Laura, and our panelists, Ed, John, Chelsea, and Dan, and obviously the team from Energy Systems Catapult as well. I think we've talked a lot about a number of topics here, but for me, the key is I think everyone's in agreement that data and digital can add a huge amount of value to the UK economy, to the clean growth agenda, and also to the energy transition. The majority of people that spoke talked about whole systems thinking or collaborating together. And I think there's definitely a consensus amongst those of us today in terms of working together to make sure that we learn lessons from each other from the different subsectors of offshore energy, but also look at a consistent and cohesive approach going forward. A couple of things that really stood out for me was nearly everyone talked about data quality and also the challenges that potentially faces us in terms of legacy data, in making sure that data is available to a quality that can be used with current technologies in terms of either machine learning or AI, for example. The other thing that came out quite strongly for me was not on necessarily the strict data side, but more around the skills and culture side. Without the right culture in place and the skills for both the technical solutions and actually using the data, we won't be able to get the greatest value out of that data. And I think Simon summed it up really well by talking about this project as a catalyst. So the data in itself, in my view, is a catalyst. And I think that this strategy will give us some very clear actions and outcomes that we can work on together to make sure that we have an approach that works for the whole energy offshore system. So just a reminder in terms of how you can get involved. There is an email address on the bottom of the slide you can see now where you can sign up to be part of the mailing list. We'd also like to hear your ideas and insight. We saw a couple of the questions coming up in the chat there. So there's obviously interest in this. Please do let us know and we can make sure that you are involved in the industry events that will be running through October and November. Also, if you've got any questions or comments that you think about after this session, please do drop those to the email address as well, and we'll monitor that inbox and make sure that those questions and thoughts are addressed. So thank you everyone for signing in today. The session has been recorded and will be available to watch afterwards if you want to watch it again. I want to share it with colleagues who couldn't make it at this particular time. Thank you for your time.